Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel.
Jeff Berkowitz here in Chicago.
And Jeff, we want to start off first by thanking our viewers for watching. Last week's show broke all records for viewing, so don't forget, folks, we appreciate you watching. And we also want you to make your comments, especially as we get into some very contentious issues this week. One, the budget for the city of Chicago, and then we're going to be covering the Chicago teacher strike. And Jeff, earlier this week, Mayor Lori Lightfoot gave her budget. And of course, she had a big hole to fill, and you were covering the issues. So why don't you bring us up to date?
Well, the short message is she covered the whole, but not very specifically, and that's what we'll get into. So there's some vagueness, but she at least has the items. You can view them as targets. Look, she has to get this approved by the city council. She'll have 5 or 6 weeks from today's date when we're taping this to actually do this, get that approval. We're taping on October 25th. So she's got time. Maybe she has it filled in and she just hasn't told us yet all the details. But the big thing is it's an $11.6 billion budget. It's, before we said 10 billion, it's kind of the same thing. That is, if you don't count grants and so forth, you get back down to a little less than 10 billion. So if you hear two numbers, don't be too confused. 10 billion basically equals 11.6. Okay? And what we're going to see here, and what you see it right there on the screen now, that fiscal year 2020 budget, $11.6 billion, savings and efficiencies she's got in there of $538 million. Remember, her hole was $838 million, so she's well on her way to plugging it with savings and efficiencies. She says reforms. I don't know if there are many reforms there, but then we'll see the other place to plug the hole is with new revenue. And she doesn't want to have a property tax. That's the big news here. The big news is she's got new revenue of $352 million that includes a small property tax increase of $18 million to help keep libraries open, which I think is a good idea. But nothing like Rahm Emanuel's $500 million plus real estate property tax increase of a few years ago. So that's what basically, she didn't say this, but the mayor is saying, read my lips, no big increase in the property tax, really nothing, no increase in the property tax at all, if you put the libraries aside, that small thing. But she may need some help from the legislature, actually just a modest amount to approve some of the taxes that she has in mind. Okay, and there we see on the graph, new spending of $58 million. Some people may question, when things are so tight, and he's handling which we'll get to in a minute, this tough CPS, CTU negotiation and strike and so forth, do you really want to have new spending? She's a progressive. Her constituency, which is progressive, wanted to see some new spending on affordable housing, on mental health. She gave them that. That's the overview. Let's see, maybe we can take it in a somewhat more detail now. And if we can take a more detailed look at some of these, whether you call them efficiencies or cuts, let's break that 538 million down. Well, we see 200 million. It says securitized future revenue. Basically, that's a refinancing of bonds that totaled previously about 1.4 billion. She's going to sell off some body parts. She's going to securitize some future revenue, which makes it not available should the city of Chicago go into bankruptcy and they wanted to, they wanted to pay some of the creditors with revenue they have, can't use it. That's how she got the interest rates down on these bonds, and she took all of the benefit of getting lower interest rates in this year. Can't repeat this next year. She's got another $200 million hole for sure next year, because this one is non-repeat, okay, a one-time only. And then zero-based budget, 150 million. She's not telling us what specifically she's cutting. She'll have to tell the city council in the next few weeks. But the zero-based budget means you start not with last year's amount in the budget, you say zero, and then you say, how much do we really need? And so the theory there is you'll cut out some wasteful spending that simply was there, reflecting priorities of years past. So 150 million there, that's We don't know the details. And sort of management, efficiency.
You know, when you have an 11, what was it, $0.6 billion budget? Yeah, $11.6
Right.
billion. That's probably a lot of line items in there. But Jeff, you know, one of the things that the mayor said, she was going to be raising revenues, and everyone was expecting that. She said she's trying to control doing that, but here and there she is adding new taxes that she brought up in her speech. One of those.
Terry,
Go ahead.
read my lips, folks. I'm going to exaggerate a little bit and say for her, no new property taxes. Okay, 18 million, but that's to keep the libraries open on Sunday for the kids. I think that's a good idea. Make those, especially on the south and west side where your kids got to get away from the gangs, away from the homicides. You got a safe place. I'd put some cops over there. Make that library the safest place on the south and west side. Okay. Anyway.
Well, the mayor said that among other things.
No new property taxes.
No new property taxes.
I remember Bush said no new taxes, and he broke it. Will the mayor break this promise?
Well, the mayor did say, among other things, she said she's going to have tax increases in a variety of areas. One of them is going to be on the Uber rides that are famous, and in part because they're cheaper than taking taxis. But here's what the mayor said.
We've determined an increase in our ground transportation tax on downtown ride shares on weekdays is warranted. This congestion tax would apply during the key hours between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. when the central business district faces its highest levels of gridlock. Our rideshare proposal will bring in an additional $40 million to our budget while also lowering vehicle emissions and encouraging the use of more efficient modes of transportation like public transport. And our reforms will improve the playing field for our taxi drivers.
Well, it might improve the playing field for the taxi drivers, Jeff, but that just means that the cost is going to be going up, and so the savings over taking an Uber or a Lyft are not going to be as great as they were before versus taking a taxi.
If you're a millennial with a high value of time and you're thinking of hopping in an Uber or Lyft from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and you don't want to share it because that slows you down a little bit, so you're a solo ride, the mayor thinks you're helping congest the city. So she says, not only, look, if it works and she accomplishes her goal, she's going to force this higher tax that's going to give her $47 million. Well, it's only on that specific time in those specific areas in downtown. If you're out in the hinterland in the parts of Chicago, you're not going to pay for this. If you're somebody who shares a ride, you click on Uber or Lyft, they give you a choice. Will you share with 2 or 3 people? You're not paying a higher price, because then she thinks you're giving us less congestion. But the more she pushes people into sharing, the more she pushes people into using it a different time or walking, less revenue. So the more successful she is, this revenue is not going to be achieved. She might want to think about that. But she's counting on $47 million from Uber and Lyft, what I'll call peak time solo riders tax. Okay.
Well, that's not the only thing. She's also saying, hey, you want to go out to dinner? You want to have some drinks? Good. We're going to increase the tax on that too.
We will be calling on our food and dining industry through a modest increase in our restaurant tax from 0.25% to 0.5%, putting Chicago on par with neighboring suburbs. Now, though the increase may seem small, it is expected to generate an additional $20 million in the upcoming year. And we will increase the library portion of the property tax by $18 million to fully invest in our libraries and allow them to be open 7 days a week.
Jeff, I know you are a fan of libraries, but it seems to me if you're trying to close a budget gap, maybe not having libraries open and not spending more money is a thing to do.
No, you can even cut down on some of your police force. You save money on public safety. In the long run, it's a wise investment. If you can bring people in there, we don't want those libraries to be, like low use on Sunday. We don't want a 10% utilization with 5 people. So she's got to really promote this. I don't know who she could get to do it, but I'm serious. Okay, but there's that small property tax to keep the libraries open. But basically, it's $37 million she's getting from an increased tax on restaurants and services, okay? Will she get it? Possibly. Look, the millennials and other people who've got some dough, They want to go out and, especially on the weekends, and have a nice meal and have a few drinks, knock it down. She's counting on, as the economists say, an inelastic demand. Raise the price. It's like raising the tax on the rich, and they won't flee. I don't know. Some of those millennials may start, eating at home.
We've seen governors in other states, such as New York, raise the taxes on properties, and people have fled. It also because of the amount in New York's case, the tax on income.
Yeah. Let me get this out because we're running low on time. We don't want to do that just at the end. So we got, in summary, that $352 million in new revenue. What do we got? We got 47 million, as we said, from Uber, Lyft. We got 37 million from restaurant services. What else we got? Well, we got 24 million from recreational cannabis. It's legal in January 1. She's not counting on new casino revenue yet, but she is counting on you folks who like a little bit of cannabis. We used to call it marijuana, pot. Go out and buy it, recreate, and help the city by paying taxes.
Let me ask you a basic question. When does the city's fiscal year start?
January 1.
January 1. So, I mean, is she counting on that recreational marijuana? Because, I mean, while it'll be the law, it's going to take a while for those businesses to be set up.
Well, not too, because remember, she's starting out. We have medicinal marijuana legal already, and some of the same people who've been doing medicinal marijuana are getting the licenses to do recreational marijuana. So they should be up and going that first week in January. Okay. I'm not so sure, being serious, this is a really good idea to have the city, the state out there hawking, hey folks, get going on enjoying yourself with recreating on marijuana or on liquor or on cigarettes and any of those things. But that's discussion for another day. So what did we say? 47 million for Uber, Lyft, 37 million for restaurants, 24 million from the cannabis tax. And we've got something on this because 50 million is going to come from what I'll call the home sale tax. She'll call the progressive real estate transfer tax.
They include reforming the Chicago's real estate transfer tax, which is a tax that applies to anyone buying or selling a home. These reforms that we recommend will bring an additional $50 million this coming year, with an additional $100 million every year after that.
Okay, so there you see she's talked about what I'll call the home sales tax. It's graduated, it's progressive, not based on income, but the higher the price of your home that you're selling, the more you're going to pay in this exit tax. You're leaving town, Chicago you don't like so much anymore, or you're going to some other part of Chicago. Anyway, if you sell your home and it's less than $500,000, you're actually going to get a cut in your home sales tax, okay? And if it's 500,000 to $1 million, you're going to get no change. The money here for the city comes from those people selling homes or co-ops or condos in excess of $1 million, and it caps out at 10 million. Sounds like a lot. Right now, if you got a $10 million house, you'll be paying a tax on that sale of about $75,000. It's going to go up $100,000 more. So, it's like $177,000. Anyway, she's counting on getting $50 million from the tax she calls the progressive real estate transfer tax in the first year, but she's got to get this. She has to get the Illinois legislature to approve that. But everybody's talking about how much she needs approval. That's like small stuff, Terry. She could go to Terry Martin and borrow $50 million.
Here's the thing. The other, before we wrap up and move on to the strike, the mayor had also said about 2 months ago in a speech that even with all of the efforts that she's doing to close the $838 million hole she had in the budget, and she would say that she's done that, she also said we're going to have pension cost increases over the next 2 years of $600 million. So even if she closed that hole now, she's still going to be facing, over the next several years, a lot more money coming due that she's going to have to be finding revenues to pay for or make cuts somewhere else. And Jeff, that also doesn't yet include any additional costs for teacher demands with this Chicago teacher strike that is ongoing.
And before we go there, let me just note two things. We omitted two sources of additional revenue one is extremely important because it accounts for half of her new revenue, almost half. $163 million comes from this thing called emergency service reimbursement. It's a partnership with the state. The state's going to reimburse under a new formula that gives City of Chicago more for the emergency services they provide, and the state wants to partner that with the city. 163 million for that, as well as some funds, additional funds coming from the Fire Chiefs Association. So that's a biggie, 163 million. If something should happen, I don't know what would, that's way more important than the real estate transfer tax. And the last thing is, I'll mention, the mayor declared a record TIF surplus of over $300 million.
Tell us what a TIF is again, for those who
TIF
don't.
is it's tax increment financing. Basically, it diverts taxes that might otherwise go to taxing units like your schools and so forth into help finance, presumably, new development in blighted areas. It's been criticized a lot for progressives because you're developing the loop, which is hardly a blighted area. We won't get into that other than say that's where that money's coming from. She's only taking 30 million of that 300 million from that TIF surplus for the city. She's given 167 million to CPS.
Okay, so the mayor has a couple of financial rabbits up her sleeve, so to speak.
But the big thing you just mentioned are the pensions that are going to start booming. It's 1.7 billion for the city this year. In just 2 or 3 years, it's going to go like 2023 to 2.4 billion from its prior 1.2
So for
billion.
all this work that she's doing, what the viewers ought to understand is they may have put a Band-Aid over this budget, but there's still a financial cancer that Chicago is facing.
The big thing for the state and the city, pension reform, they're not getting it. She thinks you don't need it. You're not getting an amended constitution that will allow the city and the state to cut pension benefits. It's $200 billion in hole for the state of Illinois. It's $70 billion for CPS in Chicago. You know, they're not touching that. That's the big reform that she needs. She's resisting it.
Okay.
Another show, another day.
We got another big story. Let's move along to that. And Jeff, here is this afternoon, we had the teachers gathering Friday afternoon here in Grant Park. You see the video from our friends at Channel 7 with their helicopter, which is nice. And the teachers have now been out all week, and we don't know yet if it's going to be concluded over the weekend. I think there is some talk, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there might be something going on, and there is some hope that maybe by Monday something might be resolved on the strike. But it's a long strike thus far, and it's causing a lot of consternation. The teachers are still saying that they haven't found yet the things that they're looking for.
Here's what you got to know, okay? We're taping this on October 25th. This is the 7th day of the strike. 7 days of lost education, because the mayor has vowed and said, we usually, when we have a strike like this, well, if we lose 7 days, we make it up at the end of the year. June goes, the education year goes further into June. People delay their vacations, etc. We're not doing that. And that, if they do that, well, teachers are going to get a bundle more from the higher salaries, but they lose 7 days of income. My bet, she reneges, and they somehow make that up. But the main thing is, there's very little discussion in the mainstream media of the cost of this strike. And what there is misleading, if not downright erroneous. Here it is, folks. Here's the true nitty-gritty. You know, it's not a 16% increase in salaries for the teachers over 5 years. It's 25%, okay? It's not a $350 million increase as some people put out. It's $550 million, okay? I mean,
Jeff, I want to move along to a couple of things. The teachers' unions are saying, you know, it's not just about salary, that one of the things they're pressing for is more positions, more librarians, more counselors, these kind of positions. Some people call that support staff. So while the teachers are getting more money, they also are holding out for more positions. And earlier today, Jesse Sharkey, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, talked about that and why they're insisting on having these positions written into a contract and not just have the mayor, which he has already done, say, hey, I'm for that. Let's listen to what he had to say this morning to reporters.
There's some history in CPS of sort of promises about staffing levels that aren't kept in practice, in reality, and we have to get that figured out. We have to make sure that we have something in the contract that reassures our members who are in these schools that what they say they're going to do is really going to happen.
So that's the deal, Jeff. They're holding out for that, among other things, but
Well, here's
so
what,
no
if we had
solution.
Jesse Sharkey here, if we had Jesse here, you know what we'd ask him? If we had Dr. Janice Jackson here, Superintendent CPS, you know what we'd ask him? We'd say, here, try this one out. There are 360,000 students in CPS, but approximately 60,000 go to charter schools. That's not a part of the CTU. It's not a part of the strike or issue. So you know how many students CTU is covering? 300,000. It's a large number. How many teachers? 25,000. Okay, folks, if you got a calculator, or you can do this in your head, divide 25,000 into 300,000. You know the answer? 12. That's the ratio of teachers to students, 12 to 1. Here's my question for Jesse. If you have a ratio of 12 teachers, if that's truly what they are, 12 teachers, 12 students for every teacher, 12 to 1, how do you get to this class size that you say 5% or more of your classrooms have more than 30 students? Some have 40. I saw somebody claiming 56. It doesn't add up. Do the math. What do you think they'd say, Terry?
Well, they would say that they need, the mayor offered, the school board, I should say, offered $700,000 in lowering class sizes. Jesse Sharkey also spoke to that today. He said that ain't near enough.
I don't want to underplay how resolute we are about the things we need to achieve in this contract. We're serious about class size enforcement that's adequate. It's not just, the last offer the board made, the one that's on the table now, is for $700,000 of class size relief in high school. I mean, there's probably $700,000 worth of class size relief that this school right here needs. And I'm just guessing, I don't know what the situation is, but that would be typical. And and we view that this is a civil rights issue. We think that the conditions in our schools, we think that support for our students that need trauma support, social workers, psychologists, counselors. In the civil rights movement, in that tradition, people are willing to put their bodies and themselves on the line for that. And so, as this thing continues, that's what's in the future if we can't get a resolution.
Okay, the big picture, folks. We got about 5 minutes left, so let's give you the big picture. When this negotiation started 2 months ago, the mayor came out and she said, look, we can get this deal done. They wanted 14%, CTU wanted 16% increase. We offered 14, we'll give them 16, okay? They want this, they want that. Look, I'll give it to them. I don't want to strike. That's not a good way to negotiate. To say, I'll give everything you want and they don't give you anything. Okay, that's number one. So why start out? Look, if the city is in such terrible shape, if it has $70 billion with CPS and unfunded pensions, okay? If the city of Chicago is just, and bond rating is just barely above junk, and CPS is below, is junk bonds, that's their rating, below Detroit, you're in trouble. You got to start cutting. You can't just live like you can just give. So why don't you go to CPS, to CTU, and say, here's my offer. We will cut your salaries 3%, minus 3%. We're not going to, I'll tell you what, we'll just cut it 2% a year. So it'll be a 10% cut over 5 years, and instead of the 16% increase you want, because we don't got it. Okay, now maybe you negotiate to a freeze level. Okay, you don't raise salaries, but you don't cut them, but you don't raise them.
We just went over all the dollars that the mayor is trying to use the new revenue, some of the efficiencies that she would say to close that $838 million gap. She talked about in another speech, she's going to be facing $600 million. You talked about the increase in pensions. So now, you know, we have the teachers union pressing for more money, and the mayor's going to have to face that too. We talked recently with Ted Dabrowski. Let's listen again to what he said about how this cost is going to be impacting the Chicago budget.
Chicago is already insolvent in most people's opinions, anybody that's looking at the numbers. And Chicagoans are already on the hook for massive amounts of debt. And so it's really hard to think about how Chicagoans can really afford either one of these outcomes, regardless of how the strike ends up and what terms are agreed to.
Okay, so in our remaining time, we've just been talking about pensions. Let's emphasize that. Because as you boost these salaries, remember, right now the average teacher, is about 78,000, and that's going to go up to 100,000, okay? So as you do that, pensions are a percentage. Your pensions that you retire at are a percentage of your highest level, okay, as a teacher. So every time you keep boosting teacher salaries, you're boosting pensions. You're $70 billion in the hole when you look at Chicago and CPS. CPS is 24 billion in the hole for pensions. So just ask yourself, well, the teachers say, hey, we don't get Social Security, so we need that. Okay, you need some pension, but Social Security, folks, maxes out at $26,000 a year, and the average Social Security recipients about $18,000 a year. CPS, okay? If you can read that chart, a teacher currently in the system who's been there for 30 years, which is a full-time person, full career, okay, 34 years, their salary is currently about $98,000, and they will retire this year with a pension that starts at $70,000. Hey, Jeff, could you say that again? $70,000. Hey, Jesse, is that enough? $70,000. Yes, that's going to go up. And they've only put in about $35,000. They were supposed to go half and half, but 40 years ago, the powers that be said you only have to put in 2% instead of 9%. So they put in $35,000. They get $2.2 million out of it. Is that any way to run a railroad? Nobody's talking about this except us, okay? We're not anti-teacher, but you don't have that money, Mayor, to be negotiating the kind of contract you offer. Let what they want to do. The other thing is, okay, the other rep is, they keep talking class size. I told you folks, it's a ratio of 12 students for every teacher. How do they get to 25, 30, 35? I don't get it, okay? And the other thing is they want 200 more social workers, 200 more nurses. They want all of that. That's because Jesse, as head of the union, needs members. With each new member, psychologist, social worker, etc., they're going to be becoming part, if they're not a part already, of CTU to get fees. This is all about and then he wants it in the contract.
Well, Jeff, as we close out, what's your best guess as far as when this will wrap up?
I'd say by Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, we'll go from 7-day strike to 10 days. They will have pretty much everything they wanted. They've squeezed everything from the mayor. She's given away the store. The city's going in hawk. You can't do this 4 more years. And they may get her to reduce it from a 5-year contract to 3 years so they can squeeze her just before the election. Who knows what they do.
We're going to have to go. Please leave your comments and pass this around. Share it with friends if you wish. Jeff, always good to visit with you. And folks, thanks for watching.